So as you might guess, I was absolutely blown away by the remake of Separate Ways, the DLC for the Resident Evil 4 remake, where you play as Ada in a 6-hour, 7-chapter reflection of the main game that packs so much more than you could ever hope for, literally for like £10. That is cheaper than a Ganado case charm from the merchant. Oi! It's just such good value, but let's continue. In short, I genuinely think that it's one of the best DLCs I have ever played, like just for myself played ever in terms of DLCs. You definitely get far more content than I think anyone should have expected from this DLC and a Resident Evil DLC in general. Granted, I have yet to play the Village DLC, so I will hold my judgment until I've gotten through that. But in any case, I love how we see almost the whole main game from another perspective, and how Ada is led to the points in which we see her intersect with Leon in the main game. The remake of Separate Ways was my first chance seeing it, old or new, and from what I have seen of the original Separate Ways from videos and as such, the remake seems to add a lot more lore, story locations, and is obviously much better in terms of its gameplay. As well as, like with the rest of the Resident Evil timeline, it reshapes and alters characters to fit a more grittier and darker tone. More on Wesker later. Firstly, before we get into any of the gameplay and the action sequences and stuff, we just have to talk about this hookshot that Ada has. We all know it's sort of part of her mystique. We saw it in the original Resident Evil 4. I'm not sure if we saw it prior to that, but if I remember rightly, that was the first time we saw Ada with this hookshot. But how we get to use it almost as a weapon in this DLC is fantastic, and it's so much fun to use. From using it to get around enemies in tight spaces like the maze sequence, which was just brilliant I thought, to unlocking a case charm that can actually use the hookshot to pull shields away. For those of us that have played it, we all know that where the hookshot really shines though is in just the beautiful and well done action sequences and boss battles in this DLC. You know, starting with the El Gigante, you just I literally was just like on the edge of my seat watching Ada freaking hookshot around, getting freaking knives in. It was just so well done. I thought it just looked seamless and pretty. I'm trying to get my words together because you can tell I'm very much enjoying okay. You know, from that to the laser corridor sequence at the end of the game with Big Martin or Martinico, like that whole bit was just, it was like breathtaking to watch, and I enjoyed every second of it. Again, as I say, they just make Ada look like a freaking, well, she is like a super agent. You know, she even done the same thing with freaking Sadler at the end. Like every time you got a decent boss battle, the hookshot was involved in some way or another, and it was used so, like, it was just so much fun to watch these cutscenes, let alone actually using it in the gameplay. You know, it wasn't just used for escaping. Capcom made sure that the hookshot was sort of a part of Ada's identity, and boy did they do a great job of that. What I also love is that you get to see those same scenes that you see of Leon and Ashley in the main game from Ada's perspective, and you just kind of, you didn't really realise it before, but Ada's sort of been with Leon throughout the whole thing. You know from the main game she's around, but you don't really know where specifically she is. And you know, it's just the small subtle things and stuff that she does or that you do in the DLC that sort of, that Leon ends up discovering or notices, and vice versa. And I just thought that was really, for some reason, just really fun and enjoyable to see. It sort of helps complete the Resident Evil 4 remake, if you like. So it sounds a bit weird, I know, but Capcom was smart too. You know, throughout my playthrough with Leon, I was always saying, oh, I'm surprised they left out that area, you know, like the sewers and the gallery, for example. They left those out of the game. only to then find out that they actually saved those areas for Ada in separate ways as a surprise for everyone. And it just makes me smile as an OG. It just makes me smile when I see these. I was like, oh my god! And then they have some of the original music, remix and stuff in those areas. It's very nice, especially as an OG Resident Evil game. You know, and thinking about it, now there's very little from the original game in terms of like location stuff that were actually cut in the end. You know, which, and I hate to bring this up because for anyone that watches all of my Resident Evil content, you guys know this once again adds fuel to the fire as to why the Resident Evil 3 remake, I always have to bring it up, it just wasn't given the same love and care as Resident Evil 4 and 2. Like, I'm pretty sure it was done by a different team that did not do as good a job, sorry. And this DLC, you know, this DLC almost feels like it had that same love and care. It did. That Resident Evil 2 and the main game for Resident Evil 4 had. Capcom were very specific in giving the player a good number of stealth areas to go along with Ada's sort of secret agent espionage vibe, which, you know, she is. She's an agent, she's trying to get in, get the amber, get out sort of thing. It fit the gameplay and just her and her sort of character and stuff so well. You know, you get creeping up on enemies with your knife, then shooting up to a higher platform and kicking the guard over as you go. You know, even the start of the game was really fun, just in the castle early on, because I'm a mad stealth guy. You know, I love my Metal Gear and stuff like that. So to have this larger emphasis on stealth in a Resident Evil game in DLC, I absolutely loved. Like, for me, this was phenomenal. I was cranking up the durability on my knife so much just so I could make sure that I would knife and try and use like the quick action stuff as much as possible, because that's how I like to play. As I mentioned the music before, for the stealth areas, you know, that music also brilliantly tied it in and made you feel like you were on a secret mission, of course, which Ada was. You know, it gave us tracks from the old soundtrack as well as like remix versions. You know, it was great, and when it was packed together with, like, when you just stumble across an area from an old game that we didn't see with Leon, and old puzzles that were sort of reborn or twisted slightly, like the bottle of wine. So in the original Resident Evil, you would have to shoot the bottle of wine, like with the sniper rifle, that would open the door, and in this one they used a couple of different wine bottles that opened different doors. And it was just, again, it's something else that just put a smile on my face as an OG. I've got to stop saying that, but it was just nice. Like, Capcom are really good, and they do those sort of nostalgic bits subtly, and they do it really well. Let's move on to the characters in the DLC, and before we get onto obviously Ada and then Wesker, I'm just so glad to see Luis get a lot more screen time, as he was so good and so brilliant in the main game. Like, we love him, we love Luis, and we did not see enough of him in the main game. And I think I said that in my sort of review of Resident Evil 4, which you can check out here, by the way. But the thing is, and I wasn't aware, Capcom done that on purpose, and they used him in Ada's DLC much better, because they knew that putting Ada with Luis would just be great it would just be great, and it was. Like, their banter, you know, sort of the way the little bit of chemistry, you know, with the dance early on. It was just really, it worked so well. Like, they knew that putting them two together would just work so well, and it did. We miss you, Luis. But let's move on to Ada, and I talked a fair bit about her in my review of the full game, and that I wasn't the biggest fan of the script writing for Ada, and, you know, sadly for the most part, it's, as well as the main game, it's the case in the DLC as well. You know, I don't think the voice acting personally is the reason for that, and obviously that's a massive thing in itself that I'm not going to get into. I just thought that some of the delivery in those scenes just seems to fall flat. You know, where in the past Ada sort of had, I don't know if flair's the right word, but like she sort of had a persuasion and a swagger in those conversations, specifically with Leon, that just don't hit the same way. And in the DLC, it's kind of similar. Like it's a bit more, maybe like stoic. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but just in her dealings, it's a bit more. I don't want to say robotic, because that would be, I think, a bit unfair.
So, we're talking millions of casualties.
Billions.
How ambitious.
But that small gripe aside, Ada wins me over every time anyway. So let's move on to Wesker. And this was his sort of big introduction into the modern remake timeline, and we saw him a lot more in the DLC, and whilst he certainly comes across incredibly menacing and villainous, much more so than Wesker in the past, I would say. And I mean that in terms of maybe like Resident Evil 0 to Resident Evil 3, 4, not so much 5. He was certainly sort of turned a corner in 5 and became that really fearsome villain. But as of yet, I'm not entirely sold on him. And I'm not bashing it at all. You know, I will always love DC Douglas and Richard Warre's versions of Albert Wesker's voices from the previous games. You know, but I really look forward to seeing and hearing this new Wesker. I just think they need to be careful with how serious and fearsome that they make him. With literally almost anything he said was with that malice and that like menacing tone. Because let's also bring up the fact that Resident Evil always embraces cringe. Like it does, obviously less so in the remakes and stuff. You know, the remakes have got their darker and more serious tones than their predecessors. But some of Wesker's lines really did just make me laugh. Whereas, you know, I think I'm meant to just, he's meant to make me, I'm meant to be scared of him, you know. And sometimes that just didn't happen. You know, maybe it's the point with some of his weird lines, and I'll just put one in here that really did just make me crack up. Because I just couldn't take him seriously.
As long as you can keep your dog under control.
He's a good boy. Predictable.
Fine. Keep your mutt. But don't come crying to me if you get bit.
The woman was too stunned to speak.
There's only one more thing I want to mention before obviously telling you guys to go out and play this DLC, because you absolutely should. And that is about my personal journey with the regenerators. Right, so first off, I don't inherently find Resident Evil games all that scary. Compare them to indie horror games in first person, you know, the jump scares and the ambient build up of tension, they get me so much more in those games than in Resident Evil games. Not saying the Resident Evil games aren't scary. I have absolutely been terrified of Resident Evil games in the past, from Resident Evil 1 to Resident Evil 2. I'm talking about the classics as well. So yeah, just putting that out there. I struggled in the original GameCube version of Resident Evil 4 to play the regenerator section because of obviously the creepy breathing audio that scared me, and you know, all of the notes and the build up and the tension, all that sort of stuff. But luckily my brother and my friend beside me, they got me through it, you know, with the power of friendship. So then when the remakes came along, I mentally prepared myself, because I was looking forward. I knew I had to face off against them again. And I managed to, you know, I was a big boy and we got through those sections with Leon. It weren't too bad in the end. I was expecting it to be worse, you know. Check out my review, because I might have said something completely different about those moments, but honestly I don't think they were too bad. But Separate Ways, oh my god. This was, I think without question, the scariest time I've ever had in a Resident Evil game. And yes, that includes that one and only scary moment in the entire game of Resident Evil Village, in the basement at House Beneviento in Resident Evil Village. You know, and an honourable mention to the liquor through the mirror in the original RE2. That was great as well. But for real, taking out the power module that you need, which killed all the lights, so essentially having to look through that goddamn thermal scope sort of the whole time with no peripheral vision. You know, I struggled. You know, here's how long it took me to mentally prepare myself for this sequence. And you know, typical. I would run out of ammo against the Iron Maiden as well, so I had to run. I honestly wasn't expecting regenerators to show up in Ada's route. Legit, it feels like a Claire B to Leon's A, you know. This is Ada B, you know. But anyway, this DLC is that good. It's like another side of the Resident Evil 4 coin that I would legitimately argue at this point is actually better than the Resident Evil 3 remake. That was a fully fledged, you know, you paid, what was it, like £30-40 for that? You know, and which for Jill is just, again, it's a really sad thing for me to say, you know. But let's not end on a point of contention, you know, let's celebrate what is one of the best pieces of DLC from Capcom, if not in gaming. Like, genuinely, I'm not overstating how good this is. Ada is absolutely breathtaking in these cinematic moments and in the gameplay itself, and I look forward to seeing more of that in years to come when we hit Resident Evil 6, the remake, or maybe even earlier. Thanks for watching.